This is an NBC News special report. Here's Tom Yamas.
And we are coming on the air tonight right now with breaking news. President Trump now says he will implement a 90-day pause on tariffs on imports from more than 75 countries, but notably not for China. The president also saying that he will raise the tariff on Chinese imports now up to 125%. The market's already reacting positively to the news, with the Dow surging more than 2,000 points and climbing. We're going to stay watching that. But first, I want to go straight to our senior White House correspondent, Garrett Haake. Garrett, tell our viewers what you know so far about this decision by the president.
Yeah, Tom, it's an extraordinary bit of governing by social media posts. Less than a day after these tariffs, global in nature, went into effect on trading partners around the world, the president says he is pausing or substantially reducing most of them. A 90-day pause. His language is unclear, but it suggests that for most countries, the 75 or so who've either reached out to him or not retaliated against the United States since his tariff order will see their tariffs either paused for 90 days or reduced to that 10% flat rate for that time. In the same post, he says that he is substantially raising the tariff rate on goods from China to 125%. Tom?
Yeah, we understand the Treasury Secretary is speaking right now on the White House lawn. Let's listen in.
Ask you three quick things, if I could, for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
China,
Mexico and Canada. Mexico and Canada, are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced the tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world.
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
If I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China, when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Bassett. Can you explain more of the decision making on what feels like a reversal here? I think just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No, again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago? The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we've just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So we are expecting them to come with their best deal. As I said a week ago today, don't retaliate. Hold your ground. Let's see what happens. And China, they kept escalating, and now they have 125% tariffs that will be effective immediately.
Mr. Secretary,
go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for doing this. The 90-day pause when there was some tariffs, is that because of the whiplash that we've been seeing across the financial markets? How much was, what we saw in the stock markets, a part of this decision?
No, it's because because of the large number of inbounds. We've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem. Each one of these solutions is going to be bespoke. It is going to take some time, and President Trump wants to be personally involved. So that's why we're getting the 90-day pause.
Clarification, Treasury Secretary, there was the UN Secretary left it when the Oval Office with the president talking about this. Can you talk about what that conversation was like and what you guys pointed out that was?
Look, it's all the president's decision, and the president had a level in mind to raise the China tariffs, and then he had the 3-month pause in mind, and we were discussing the exact wording. Sorry? Of course.
The president's decision.
It's the president's decision. It was the president's decision to wait until today. And again, as I've said in the past, no one creates leverage for himself like President Trump.
Mr. Secretary,
Shelby, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, what does the president want to see by this, I think it's July 9th deadline to keep things paused? Is it just trade barriers coming down, or is it more than that?
If you're just listening in, we have been watching the Treasury Secretary there at the White House talking about the major decision made by President Trump just moments ago, saying that he's going to put a 90-day pause on those tariffs across the world for about 75 plus countries. It's going to stand at about 10%. We've been watching the Dow on the right hand of your screen go up in real time. The same with the S&P 500, the same with the NASDAQ. Apple having one of its biggest days so far, up nearly 10% on this news. The other major headline, I want to go back to Garrett on this, is that the tariffs for China have now been increased to 125%. Garrett Hake has been following this. And Garrett, it's interesting on this big piece of news that he announced on Truth Social, the 10% for the rest of the world was the bottom part of that post, if you will. The headline, the first part for the president, was that he's coming after China even harder. And this is interesting because it follows what he said last night at a reception there in Washington. Tell our viewers about his tone during that reception.
Yeah, the president spoke for more than an hour last night in front of Republican lawmakers. He was all over the map, but much more aggressive about China and somewhat dismissive of the rest of the world, suggesting that so many world leaders were coming to him, essentially begging for trade deals. He wanted to focus on China, the world's worst actor, the Treasury Secretary just said, when it comes to trade imbalances. The Treasury Secretary, I thought, was notable not to call this a trade war, but it is another substantial retaliation in what's been a several weeks long, but especially over this last week, significant tit for tat, a back and forth between the United States and China, erecting further tariffs on each other's goods. That will be perhaps better received, certainly by the markets, as we're seeing, but also by the president's fellow Republicans who've been asking him, in some cases, begging him on television to focus his desire to reform the global trade system on China specifically and to not sort of catch up so many other of our allies and even other potential adversaries in the global trading context around the world, but to keep this narrowly focused on China. Now it appears, at least for the next 90 days, or at least until the president changes his mind on this again, that that's what they will get. And I think, Tom, that is an important caveat. The White House has spent almost the entirety of the last week telling reporters that these tariffs were permanent. They were not a negotiating tactic. They were something that the president was dug in on to remake the global economy. And now, a week later, they are paused for the next 90 days.
All right, Garrett Hake for us. I do want to get to our NBC News senior business correspondent, Christine Romans, who also joins us live tonight. Christine, they're going to be selling neck braces down there on Wall Street because there's been so much whiplash. The market's now up on this news. Break this down for our viewers, right? Because it can get kind of confusing with the tariffs and the back and forths. Right. For right now, 10% for most countries. For China, it's 125%. So for the viewer at home, what does that mean?
It still means there's a big new tariff on. It's just not the big, scary, sort of crippling tariff that the president had threatened and actually went into effect a little bit after midnight. And when you see the market response here, you can see that this is music to investors' ears who were really worried that those higher costs were going to be a big, big problem for business and for profits and for consumers and how much money consumers can spend. And to give you just a little bit of perspective, Tom, now you've got for the S&P and the Dow, this big big monster rally here in the stock market has taken back about half of the losses that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 days. So when you think of that big washout that stocks had, they fell so sharply. Now they've crawled back halfway back. So that shows you how the power of this pause headline and just how important it was for investors.
It's extraordinary the amount of wealth that is being moved with just these social media posts. Yeah. I do want to ask you, how are businesses operating in this environment, right? Our partners at CNBC have reports up about ports very concerned that there might be a pileup of cargo because people aren't sure if orders are going to be rejected with these tariffs. How is this affecting those businesses that are trying to ship things around the world?
Well, look, they need clarity. They make a plan today for something that's going to arrive in weeks or months, right? And so the 3-month pause, while welcome, there are business owners who I've been talking to for the past several weeks who say they need to know for sure what is going to be the tariff regime a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, so that they can make their hiring plans, their buying plans, how much they pay their worker plans, because these tariffs eat up a big piece of their profits and their business. So this is a 3-month reprieve for these 75 countries whose goods were going to be taxed extra. And then, U.S. importers are going to have to pay this higher tax. But still, that means they want to get this figured out. They just want clarity.
Christine, briefly, what's the advice to our viewers out there looking at their 401ks, maybe families looking at 529 plans? It's been a very wild couple of weeks for these people.
It really has. It's a reminder to please make a plan and make sure that you have the stomach for the kind of risk you're taking in the market. I mean, a lot of people who are very close to retirement have been working with their financial professionals to make sure they can weather this. If this is going to be a big process that, like the president says, where it could take some time to remake the global economy, that could be rocky for the stock market and volatile in the near term.
All right, Christine Romans, Garrett Haake, we're going to check in back with you. We have about a minute left from this special report here. We expect any more movement from the White House. The president sometimes comes out and addresses the press on moments like this. Anything so far in the works?
I do expect we'll see him shortly, Tom. He's expected to appear at an event with racing car champions, an event ripe for pun and metaphor as we watch the Dow take off here. He's also expected to sign some executive orders later in the afternoon that were supposed to be closed press, but I suspect cameras will likely be allowed inside.
All right,
Tom?
Garrett Haake for us. We're going to be watching that and monitoring what the president has to say later today. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report. We're going to have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com always, and a full wrap-up tonight when I see you on Nightly News. I'm Tom Llamas. We thank you so much for watching this special report right here on NBC.